So clearly the thinking in Washington here is that we are going to fight multiple regime change wars of choice. And like that this had been a plan. It really got animated after 9/11. Now you had some interesting information on this too, where you had explicitly heard, remind me of this. Who did you hear from that we would be in Tehran by next year? And this was in 2001. I think you had heard this.
It was in February of 2003.
Oh, okay. My mistake.
So this is the night before we attack Iraq. I was the note taker in a meeting that is called a principals committee meeting. So it's normally chaired by the president. In this case, for whatever reason, it was chaired by Vice President Cheney. But I'm sitting in the CIA director's conference room with George Tenet. He's the only person sitting at the table. I'm sitting directly behind him to take notes. And the Cheney is on one screen chairing the meeting. Condi Rice is next to him on the next screen, and Colin Powell's on the screen, and Secretary Rumsfeld is on a screen, and there are a couple of NSC senior directors, and then the head of CENTCOM, SyncCent, Commander-in-Chief of Central Command, General, who is that? Tommy Franks. And so I've always hated the order of battle briefings. I've always hated them because I don't understand them, and I just don't give a shit where we have, So anyway, Cheney starts by saying, General Franks, why don't you start off with the order of battle briefing? And I was like, ugh. So I'm ready to write it down. He's like, elements of the 1st Army Division are at this location, and the 5th Cavalry Brigade is here, and they're moving north at 20 kilometers. And I don't care where these guys are. So he finishes the briefing, and he says, if all goes as planned, we can be in Tehran by August. And George very discreetly reaches in front of him and turns off the microphone. And then he turns to me and he says, did he say Tehran or did he say Baghdad? And I said, he said Tehran. And George says, have they lost their minds? And then he discreetly turns the microphone back on and just kind of sits there for the rest of the briefing. I go down to back to my office afterwards. I should say at the very end of the briefing, this idiot who was a senior director at the NSC says excitedly, as everybody's getting up and they're logging off, he says, when we cross that border tomorrow morning, they're going to throw flowers at us. And I remember thinking, do they know nothing about history? Like they must know nothing about the history of the Middle East. So I go back to the office and my boss says, how was the briefing? And I said, did you know we were going to attack Iran? And he goes, are they still talking about that? We're not going to attack Iran. And I said, these guys know nothing about history. He said, of course they don't know anything about history. That's why they think we're going to go to Iran. We're not going to go to Iran. And then, we attacked Iraq the next day and everything turned to shit after that.
I think sometimes almost like this debate, it like gets into semantics, where people will be like, was it Israel's war? Was it our war? Obviously it's much more complicated than that. And I think that essentially the Israeli government and the US government have so merged, especially on like the deep state level, that it's almost like hard to tell where one stops and the other one begins. But there's kind of no question here that the neoconservatives, obviously, like I just said, they're writing these letters to Benjamin Netanyahu. They're clearly married at the hip with the Likud party. Obviously, the Israel lobby was very instrumental. The neoconservatives themselves are a part of the Israel lobby. Obviously, this was all very instrumental. And the feeling, I guess, was, that this will make the region safer for Israel or something like that. What was your perspective on the inside of how much of a role that, or how much of an influence that was playing?
Well, the first Gulf War was crystal clear. Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saddam miscalculated, thought that certainly the United States wouldn't go to Kuwait's aid. We didn't have very good relations with Kuwait at the time. They were members of the non-aligned movement, and we had an embassy there, but we weren't terribly close friends. He was wrong. The Iraq war was an entirely different animal. The Israelis begged us to let them join in the attack on Iraq. And everybody they approached, whether it was at the Pentagon or the White House or the CIA said absolutely not. Now, they tried to get a couple of shots in. I won't say more than that, but they tried to get a couple of shots in on the day that we crossed the border. But they were so excited as to the point of giddiness that they wanted to be involved in this war and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. You make an important point here that I want to amplify. It's not that our relations coincided. It's that the Israelis, along with the neocons, had been working on the government so consistently since the middle of the Clinton administration, since the beginning of the Clinton administration, that there was just almost no way out of it. Like, in retrospect, of course we attacked Iraq. I mean, even if we hadn't made up the whole notion of weapons of mass destruction, we would have made up something else to justify an attack on Iraq. I mean, look at Dick Cheney's efforts to connect Saddam Hussein with al-Qaeda. For those of us inside the CIA who knew a little bit about Iraq and about al-Qaeda and about Islam, I mean, everybody to a man would have said, there's literally nothing Muslim about Saddam Hussein. He famously made the Umrah, the minor pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, and it was either 1987 or 1988. He went with the vice president of Iraq, Izzat Ibrahim. Izzat Ibrahim was a pious Sufi Muslim. Saddam didn't even know the prayers. And so when they went to the Kaaba to pray, Izzat Ibrahim knelt just behind Saddam to whisper the prayers to him so that he could say them out loud and make it look like he knew what the hell he was doing. So there was no connection between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. Osama bin Laden hated Saddam Hussein at least as much as he hated the United States. There was no connection there. But Dick Cheney counted correctly, as it turned out, on the American people being so stupid and so gullible that they would just go along with it.
Yeah, well, I guess, and I don't have the expertise you have, but I do know enough to know when you see a French beret on someone, that's not a sign of an Islamist. That's usually not the first sign. You don't have to know that much to know that that's probably not what you're dealing with. But
that's right.
No, I mean, it's unbelievable. Throughout the whole thing, I remember I remember watching like Karl Rove on Bill O'Reilly, during those years come in, and he would look. They would do this because they were good at this because he never explicitly lied, but he would so play on the ignorance of the Fox News audience that he would say things, in the context of this is 2005 or something like that. And he would say, Iran is the biggest funder of terrorism. And like in an immediate post 9/11 world, that every Fox News viewer, when they hear that, is hearing, oh, you mean the guys who took down these towers? I know the Durka Muslim terrorists. Those are the guys who took our towers down. Now, he just omits that, actually, there are these shirts and skins over there, and they're different sides. And they're on the other side. They're actually at war with the terrorists who we have a problem with. And so there was this constant attempt to play on the ignorance of the American population and then mislead them toward thinking that they're, now, again, they maybe never technically said, Iran was involved in 9/11, and they really hinted at Saddam Hussein being involved, but they totally just gave that impression to the American people that that's what's going on here.
100% right. That's exactly what they did. They tricked the American people into buying into this nonsense. There's something happening right now too, and I've noticed this on Fox News and elsewhere in the right-wing print media. It's about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And in fact, I'm not positive, I think the State Department has just declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, or elements of it a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood has never, ever carried out an anti-American terrorist operation. And in fact, I mean, it's 105 years old and has never, ever been called a terrorist organization by any American administration. It's fundamentalist. It doesn't like us, but that doesn't mean it's a terrorist organization.
Right.
So what do we do? Now it's going to be a terrorist organization. Does that mean we attack it? What's the reason for making this declaration?
Yeah,
I don't understand.
Yeah, well, it's another thing that seems to be going on with this new term that it's amazing how these new terms come out and then all of a sudden every like pro-war right-winger is repeating them, but narco-terrorist is the new term now in Venezuela, where what exactly the hell does narco-terrorist even mean? Like, do you get the terrorist label? Like, okay, so they've killed civilians in an attempt to shift politics? No, that's not what we're claiming at all. There were drugs on a boat, maybe. Like, we haven't actually demonstrated that or proved it, but it is amazing how essentially terrorist became this label to like shut off your brain and shut off your conception of rights or laws of war or due process or anything like that. And then I literally heard just the other day where someone was saying, this double tap strike on this vote. It's like, why'd you have to come back and kill the wounded people who were taken out of action already? And then the next response is, oh, what are you defending narco terrorists? Exactly. Turn your brain off and just don't even think about this.
Yeah.